Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefights podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Across the fire and rescue service, across policing, paramedics, military, across our entire sector more broadly, humour has always been part of the job. It's how we bond, it's how we cope, it's how we make sense of things that frankly don't make sense. But at the same time, we're also seeing a growing tension, and I'm sure you feel it as well. More scrutiny, more policy, more conversations around misconduct, professionalism, culture, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, humour has become a bit of a grey area. What's acceptable, what crosses the line, and more importantly, what do we risk losing if we get this wrong? Because here's the truth. If we overcorrect, which we so often do, we don't just remove bad behaviour, we risk stripping out connection, trust, authenticity. So this episode is about walking that line. Today I'm really lucky to be joined by Sonia Pawson. Sonia brings a really unique perspective into this conversation because she's worked at a senior level across prison services, central government, and now within the fire and rescue service. More importantly, she's been looking directly at this issue through a couple of different lenses and through research, looking at humour in the workplace, looking at how it shows up in the emergency services sector, in the first responder sector, and crucially, looking at both sides of it, the benefits and the risks. Because this isn't a black and white conversation. There are different types of humour. Some that definitely build teams, some that protect us psychologically, and some that can undermine people, can damage trust, and can tip into misconduct. But I really like a big aspect about what we're talking about in this conversation because it doesn't just sit in theory. We get into real bits like why dark humour actually matters in high pressure environments, the kind of difference between humour and what people often label as this banter word, the role of trust, context, and psychological safety, and what leaders need to be thinking about if we want to get this right. Because this isn't about removing humour from the workplace. It's about understanding it and using it properly. There is also a personal thread that's running through this, someone that Sonia and I connected through originally, which has had a big impact on both of us. And that reminder that behind all the research, the policy, the discussion, we're talking about real people, real experiences, and in this situation, some real loss. So I think you're going to really enjoy this one. It needed to be discussed. It needs to be discussed again. We need more opinions, thoughts, ideas, and perspectives in this, because if you care about the culture, and if you care about leadership and understanding how one shapes the other and both are crucial, but also if you care about protecting the people in the job, not just physically, but psychologically, this is something we need to protect. And this is a conversation worth paying attention to. I'll see you on the other side. Have we lost our sense of humour, do you think?
That's a great question. To start us off on this tricky conversation.
Which is obviously a bit performative and perhaps a bit facetious, because we clearly haven't lost our sense of humour. Although, if you read some of our policies and procedures and did a finger on the pulse of some organisations and the way humour is dealt with, some people may lay that accusation at us to say, where'd you lose your sense of humour?
I mean, there is there's always a serious angle to things, and especially when we're talking about humour in the workplace, I would say. But what really fascinated me about getting into this topic, this research, was I actually really like humour myself. I spent 15 years at the start of my career working in the prison service, and we did talk about banter a lot, but the most energising teams that I've worked in are those teams that have been felt safe, but also felt, that there's a humorous part to it. Yeah. So humour's really important. And if we look back in history at the psychology of humour, it's really important. We know from the empirical and academic research that humour is essential for physical and psychological well-being. There's a great picture that I could have shown, but there's lots of animal studies about humour.
I read there's some references to that in the paper that we're going to share underneath here for people to have a look at. What does it tell us about that? Because it manifests there as well, doesn't it, in a different way?
Well, it does, but this is the point. We're talking about general humour here, but there's a great cartoon picture of two gorillas, and one has tied the shoelaces of the other together, and they're chuckling away. But this is the fact. There's many different types of humour, but it makes the world go round. It makes people tick. But I guess sometimes where people find it difficult to delineate is what's appropriate and where is it appropriate to use humour.
Is it more of a context? I think context is the lovely buzzword that will probably tiptoe around, and context will be one. Reasonable, relevant, appropriate. Appropriate is always the word that perhaps gets bandied around, but we tend to have sterilized all elements of our professional conduct with the same sort of whitewash, and that is not what human beings are. That is not what human beings are, and that's when people start to suffocate themselves. They start to, do a little bit of self-censorship. And then the long-term metric of that is a hemorrhaging of authenticity. And people go, well, that's not what Sonia's like. Like I've met Sonia and her family when they're in the supermarket. Sonia's funny. Sonia's this, Sonia's that. Do you know what I mean? But then when that person's at work in a different context, that's no longer the case. And again, this is a remarkably complex thing, and we're going to continue to unpick it throughout our conversation. But it reminds me a lot of, what the Overton window is?
Yes.
So that, I think, is a framework that we have dragged into the fire and rescue service, and we've tried to shrink it dramatically through fear of reputational consequence and perhaps governmental through our HMR reports. And like so many things, we tend to then over-index and throw the baby out with the bathwater, whereas the research, that you and your colleagues have done clearly shows that dark humour, which sounds like a really insidious thing, really helps emergency workers cope with trauma, stress, strengthening that team cohesion during what can be at times really high-pressure situations. MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high-performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. That's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake.
Yeah, there's quite a few points that I want to
Sorry,
there.
that's the way my brain works. It's terrible.
I guess what is really important to pick up on is the subjective nature of humour, because that's what is problematic, and I think that's why humour has become problematic in the workplace, and why there's rightly or wrongly been this association with humour and misconduct. And I can talk about that in relation to some of the work of the IOPC, and also. The reality is some humour, some banter is inappropriate. But humour, there are so many different facets to humour, as you and I have talked about. But humour, both the good, the light and the dark, has been shown to reduce clinical symptoms and also emotional distress. And it also helps us function in the workplace. So it doesn't always have to be linked to, coping, I suppose. It just helps us in terms of resilience and so on. But there is another point. If humour flips, and we can talk about some of the types of humour, if it becomes self-defeating or aggressive type of humour where, people might actually reflect it to oneself, then that is shown to have a negative impact. So there's a positive and a negative to humour, which we can get into a little bit more.
I think it'd be useful to carve out those so I keep alluding to it like a tease. We are going to put a link underneath here. People go and grab this PDF for the the slight bit of sort of psychological academia that we're referring to here that you contributed to. So if people want to follow along in that, because they'll forget some of this, I think it's a really useful document to read. This actually came first as a segue to our mutual friend Rob, who unfortunately passed in September of last year. And that hit me like an absolute ton of bricks. And so like we had lunch together, met at the Firefighter Challenge thing, had some conversations about you. Such a remarkable leader with such high emotional intelligence, whilst also still being a very fit, physical, specimen-driven individual. And that is probably, an example of one of the great tragedies of people in our sector. Whilst we won't get into the context of how Rob passed, it was a tremendous loss. But he first sent me and showed me some of the stuff that you were working on. So these 4 types of humor, that was really useful for me to read that and unpick these, because then it starts to maybe place a bit of a framework in place for people to start placing other parts of our conversation when we continue on through this. So you take us through those 4 that we've got.
Yeah, I can. So I must just come back to the point about Rob, though, because it was about a year ago, actually, that I met Rob. I was, probably just a few months before that. And he was incredibly kind. That's what really stood out to me, Rob's kindness, and curious, his curiosity. And we just got talking, actually, about a whole load of stuff. I was new to the sector. And I was telling him a bit about my background, and he was, at the time, he was selecting a new DEP, and we got talking about the selection process, leadership, and then, how to cope in, moments of pressure and so on. And it was at that time that I just started to carry out this research. So the different types of humour. So we have affiliative. So this is, a positive type of humour, which people might recognise. It can be enhancing relationships, just that kind of light-hearted humour. There's self-enhancing humour, where people use that type of humour to increase their own self-esteem. But then there are the more negative types of humour. So, we might have all experienced it. I have, I'm sure you may have, Pete. But, where it's aggressive. So this is like where jokes are to the detriment of other colleagues. If we think about that in the context of the workplace, where it's not okay, it doesn't feel
trying to humiliate somebody else.
Yeah, it's not reciprocated. That's the thing, and
or really target sharp. Some people call it wit. Wit is a very, very narrow tightrope to walk, because wittiness can often come at the detriment. I think maybe 80% sometimes wittiness. And I'm really plucking big words here. I'm sure comedians would challenge some of the things that I'm saying, but my wit, if my mum ever says you're being very witty, that's usually because I'm being sharp. I'm being a bit pointed. Yeah.
Yeah, but I still think that if you get wit right, that's a positive. Okay. And I think this is why banter, or if you like, humour that is more aggressive or negative, as being classed as banter, because in various misconduct cases, people will say, "Well, it was just a bit of banter, it's okay." And that's what I mean about, well, it should be reciprocal for a start, but what's okay to one person might not be okay to another, so that's where it becomes subjective. But going back to the types of humour, the other one is
I'll keep dragging you down rabbit holes. Sorry, that's part of my neurodivergence.
Which is, the team clown. We've all kind of might identify with someone who is the constant wanting to make fun of oneself or others. And then we get into dark humour. And there's various definitions in the literature, but the one I prefer is that it combines the tragic and the comical elements of life. It exists really to shift from a cognitive angle, perspective away from the immediate horror, I suppose, of a situation, to reduce feelings of anxiety and helplessness and trauma to make light. So there's a specific definition around the dark humour that we're going to get into a little bit.
I was surprised this glorious, I hate it when people sometimes use they use this invisible army in their pocket, where they're like, everybody said, neither you or I can speak on everyone's account, like Sonia, like, you tell me what you think. Don't tell me what everybody thinks. But so I'll stop myself from doing that. I think that I've been guilty of grouping all emergency services responders into a bit of the same bucket and go, yeah, well, we're like this, we're like that, to an extent. But I was surprised when I was reading some of the data that came out from some of the study around the differences between banter and or humor, dark humor, in policing versus fire.
Mm-hmm. I think quite interesting. Some of the differences, and what I should say about the study, anyone looking at the study, it was a very we just dipped the toe in the water. One fire and rescue service, which was West Yorkshire, one police service. So the sample size that's a limiting part of the study, and I'd love to do more. I think there's so much more that we could do. Nonetheless, we did get a good response rate, but I think the differences that really stood out to me was this much in the police sector. And I suppose community relationships are different, aren't they, with what police are trying to achieve versus fire. But in an emergency responder context, I think the use and regular use of body-worn video cameras and this aspect around citizen journalism, I think it was an inhibitor when you look at the police sample and the data coming through. And I guess the family feel of the fire service came through, because whilst there were some parallels in terms of, why do you use dark humour or humour? Well, it's to build team spirit, camaraderie. I think that was stronger in the fire sample response than it was in the police. And also this, sometimes it's okay to use dark humour in front of the public, not really. You've got.
I think it's like 95% of emergency workers said they use dark humour.
Yeah.
But over 90% said they wouldn't use it in front of members of the public.
That's right. Or, really thinking about who's the audience. But I think that the similarities in both samples are, where it's used is where it's, a shared experience where you feel that there's a level of trust. And we might, that's quite interesting, isn't it? When you think about to what degree is there a level of trust and psychological safety in different teams and so on. But what I was kind of, I suppose, pleased with or reassured by in terms of the fire response was that people must, by the response, 95% of using dark humour with colleagues had that level of trust, because this is the important consideration, I guess, from the research is, well, people do find dark humour important, and so what can we do as senior leaders, as colleagues in the sector to really put some guardrails and safeguards around some guidance and, help people to know, actually, let's normalise humour in the workplace, but in a appropriate way. And I think there's a gap there at the moment.
Well, I think there's so much to said around the numbers, maybe, in which those organisations work in. Policing tend to work in pairs and or by themselves. Yeah. Obviously, as a large percentage, I would argue that the majority of the fire and rescue service being station-based personnel, even Green Book staff are working in teams in our offices, and it somehow becomes a big part of belonging and identity inside teams. Even when some of the stuff I read in there about recruits often learn the humour culture as part of becoming almost accepted within the organisation. And then it becomes almost like a tribal signal of belonging and acceptance. Not that they have been ridiculed on the watch and then they are accepted. But if there's 4 or 5 of you stood around, you can bounce that beach ball of humour around lightly, and it develops much more sort of momentum, which can also go, positively or negatively. But then when people talk about having fun being at work, that is often a tremendous part of it. Do you know what I mean? But it's a slippery slope to start policing something like that. I say to start. I think we started a long time ago, but it seems to the point now, to echo back to the beginning of our conversation, where we've sterilized it to a point where there's an old sort of Chinese proverb where they're like, water which is too pure has no fish, and all that sort of stuff. The fire service is attractive from an operational context to weird, quirky people like me who feel like they don't belong in a 9 to 5. They can't find their professional home in a traditional corporate structure. Therefore, they are attracted to a job that is not normal. You know what I mean? That you have to have a certain risk appetite for, that you are part of your role is asking you to do things that are not normal to things you would do outside of the organization. And also, you're designing to fix problems that only a very small percentage of the population will ever be faced with. So it's almost like in most of the context where your difference is what we need you for. But then when you come inside here and we go, stop acting like a clown. Like, why don't you just act like a professional for a change? And you go, what? Like, I thought my quirkiness is what you said. Like you said, I read the EDI thing. Like you said, you wanted different and quirky and like change and all that jazz. But not this change. Be myself, but not like this, right?
Yeah.
That's the uncomfortable rub that some people get.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of the reaction when Dominic Cummings said around recruiting weirdos and misfits. Now, I don't think he meant that, but I guess what we're looking for is, in terms of a...
I think of it as a term of endearment.
What does good look? Yeah.
Lovable freaks. I'll say that. That's my words, not yours. But that's what I think of when I think of the beautiful, wonderful firefighters that I work with. Lovable freaks.
And to be honest,
I love them for it.
That's what actually, thinking back to the conversation that Rob and I shared, he said, anything I can do to help you settle into this quirky little sector, then, reach out. And that strikes me as important. But on a serious note, so there's a few things, the serious nature of this piece of work and where I go or others go next with it is, right, what we want to do is support people to do quite dangerous, quite unique stuff that not many other people in the population do, and help them to stay psychologically and physically and physiologically healthy. We need to keep reminding people, seniors and those involved in professional standards and misconduct, that humour, banter sometimes, it's healthy. And it can strengthen connection and it can help psychological safety. So pulling on your thread there, Pete, around belonging, gosh, I used to deliver loads of psychological safety training sessions. And I really, I like Amy Edmondson's stuff around, she's the guru on psychological safety. And, the thing is, we can't gift. I always say to people, you can't just gift. I wish I could, but you can't. But I tried to break down to help people understand, well, what are the facets that I think sit within psychological safety? And obviously trust is key. But I also talked about belonging, authenticity and voice. So they're the ingredients, because we want people to feel that they belong. We want them to feel that they can, come to work and be themselves. But I do have a different view on whole self to work, actually. And then we want them to have a voice. We want them to be able to talk and bring that humour to the fore, but in the right way. So there's always a hard edge to this, and we could get into some of that because, it's a bit of a tightrope.
Question on your training courses? Were they training courses or were they sessions that you would do on psychological safety?
A few different things. So I delivered in-house training to my own teams to help them understand and develop psychological safety. When I was working in a different role in central government, I delivered quite a number of sessions to senior operational delivery leaders, because I wanted to connect this notion of psychological safety with learning agility, but also how sometimes operational, when you're in a command control type role or you're in a discipline service or you're in an operational delivery profession, you're often in task mode or incident mode or command mode. So the side of the brain that you're often using from a neuroscience point of view, it's a bit harder to switch from a learning agility point of view. And if we're thinking about organisational or operational learning, which I talk a lot about here, when we're thinking about a lot of stuff from Grenfell, actually, we have to create the right conditions, not only for psychological safety, but for learning. And if you look at the neuroscience and resonant and dissonant leaders, you might know something about that, but you have to help people be able to switch to the right side and think it's okay now you've got to create the space. But the comfort zone is to be in, I'm going to go into command mode.
Well, that's what we get rewarded for as well, which comes back to that. So when you were doing these sessions, and I'm going to ask you the impossible facetious question, it's like, was that a pass-fail course?
Oh, no. It was not a pass-fail course.
No. Are your command courses pass-fail?
Yes.
Yes. Well, because they're essential, though. They're essential.
Everything's
These
essential.
are like desirable. We'd like you to have some emotional intelligence. Don't need it. Like, because I know I'm being silly, but like, all I'm saying is, and we had this conversation before we kind of get started today. Firefighters, police officers, and first responders are now stepping into environments wired with more high voltage than ever before. Everything from electric vehicles to solar panels feeding direct current through compromised structures, overhead power lines, and illicit drugs factories with improvised lethal bypasses. Any single strike in the wrong place in this type of environment can turn things fatal very quickly. And that is exactly why we've partnered with Jafco. You already know who Jafco are. They have been relied upon for decades for sturdy, get-the-job-done equipment, and they are not resting on their laurels. They are evolving to face the challenges first responders are handling today through their insulated tool range. These are purpose-built for the scenarios where contact with hidden electrical hazards isn't just possible, it is increasingly likely. Their insulated tools are engineered for real-world abuse and use, designed to keep firefighters, police officers, and all first responders alive in environments where electrification is outpacing policy, equipment, and training. And you know this. This is the kind of innovation our sector needs and the kind of investment organizations should be stepping up to support if we are serious about protecting first responders from fatal consequences. So a massive thank you to Jafco for backing the podcast and backing the crews on the ground. Go check them out, learn what they're doing, and bring that conversation into your service, because this isn't about the future, it's about right now. We have both had the privilege of being around some remarkable middle, junior, senior leaders with high levels of emotional intelligence. My personal belief is that is a remarkable stroke of luck, that we have not optimized for that. That person has gotten through the system, and largely testament to perhaps their own personal development or how they were raised or 1,000 other interpersonal tangents that they've taken throughout their life. They have developed this emotional intelligence, and thank goodness that they have. But some of them definitely have not. Definitely have not. And dependent on what their role is in the organization, they may not necessarily need it. I was asked to participate recently in some recruitment and selection processes for new firefighters. And they said in that, and I apologize to people that have heard this example before, but they say, we're going to do some interview training, so don't worry. And I said, fantastic. They said, but you did it 4 years ago, didn't you? So like, you won't need to do it again. I said, okay, no worries. I said, I don't really remember it, but fair enough. I'm relatively comfortable with interviewing people, but I feel like we should probably do a bit. And they said, oh, well, we're going to do it. So anyway, they did it over the coming months with the other pool of people, many of which have done it before. And I said the same question to them. I said, how many of them passed the interview training? So like, how many people have we got for it? And they said, oh, no, don't be silly. Like, you don't fail it. It's like a familiarization, like this is open questions, this is building rapport. And I'm like, okay, but I'm looking at the other people copied into the interview emails. Some of them are really, really, really good at their jobs. Maybe in some roles because they are undiagnosed high-functioning autism, and makes them fantastic tool at certain roles in the organization, but would make them would make them less predisposed to being a good interviewer, because it is not a skill set or is not just a character trait that's widely considered. But we don't seem to optimize for that. And that's where I think we're actually disadvantaging people when we sit them in front of someone that is well qualified, very competent, very professional, but just not a great converser, not someone that is particularly good at that skill set. But we actually don't care. We care from I'll write it on the wall perspective, but we're clearly not saying it's essential. I'll stop my soapbox tirade lecture there and invite you to pass judgment on my thoughts.
Yeah, you said a lot there. You're making me like look up. That's, I'm a real-time reflector. So just to get my
moment.
my thoughts in gear. I just need to say back to the psychological safety learning agility training.
Yeah.
It's always important to know that was they were designed and delivered for development, not selection. But I could say a lot about selection. And the measure, actually, one of my biggest passions is only doing stuff that work well, measuring what works.
What gets measured gets done.
Yeah. So the way that I used to measure or help leaders measure whether, there was any use in going to that psych safety course was Amy Edmondson. She wrote The Fearless Organisation. She designed 7 questions, I think, on psychological safety. So, for example, people are asked to rate in the team on these 7 questions before and then like perhaps 3 months, 6 months after the training, and hopefully people start to do some of the stuff. So it might be like the question, I think one of the first questions is people can bring up tough issues and concerns in this team without fear of consequence, blame or whatever. And people can Google the questions. So that's one thing that I was going to say. Since being here in this role, and you say, are we just like, are we recruit, is it the accidental manager or accidental leader type approach? I don't quite think so, but I think there's more to do. And the reason I say that is because I think the good news is, from an NFCC perspective, and in all different pockets of FRSs, there's a leadership framework. There's been work done to think about, well, what does good look like from a leadership angle? It's the
4th thing on their first page, isn't it? Utilising high levels of emotional intelligence to support people in achieving goals in their organisation. So we do want it.
We do want it. And we talk about personal impact, outstanding leadership, and then some of the organisational delivery and so on. But actually what did strike me when I was, and still now actually to this day, so over my career, I've spent a lot of time recruiting and selecting a whole host of, different role levels, role types. But I've spent a lot of time in the executive senior leadership space. I did so. I think the parallel I can draw a lot from is my time in the prison service. So I'm going to show my age now, but 25 years ago, I was embedding really sophisticated assessments that recognised how integral the human element, like, if we don't get the people stuff right, it doesn't matter how well we do when there's a riot or someone on the roof or a hostage, doesn't matter. It's the people stuff is as important as being able to do
more important. Organizational effectiveness moves at the speed of trust, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. And what I've been doing recently here in my day job is I talk a lot about, well, it's a non-negotiable, the people stuff, being able to have difficult conversations, kindness is not niceness, being able to give feedback but do it in the right way. It's as important as being able to, maintain operational competence. And people do keep saying to me a lot, well, no, people is an enabler, but doing the people stuff is enabling. And I'm like, no, I don't mean that. I mean, if you can make your people feel, like I talk a lot about putting people at the heart of everything we do. And some people say, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, try and put yourself in their shoes and try and approach every interaction in a way that is going to let that person go away and they feel valued, they feel supported, even if you say no.
I haven't got time for that, Sonia. And that's the thing, without being, that sounded quite aggressive. Sorry, but it's like, I think at times we're too impatient to be emotionally intelligent. I haven't got time for the woo-woo softly, but I've got plenty of time to deal with the grievance and the employment tribunal and the rehiring, because it's not really my money. It's just like, it's not my business. We'll just find it somewhere, won't we? But I'm like, that's the tremendous cost that I think the hidden cost, well, hidden to me and people at my level on stations, not hidden to you. I'm sure there's a running count of lost time, stress, well-being days. And I bet that is a scary number. Not specifically for your service, but I imagine in most services, that is a really scary number.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think joining the dots to get the whole package. So, don't get me wrong, there's quite a number of graphs. You can't see my hands, but, typically there's a one common graph, like interpersonal skills, the people stuff, the emotional intelligence. It doesn't change. So no matter if you're a firefighter or you're the chief fire officer, you need that stuff. What does change is your technical skills will narrow and your leadership and management skills branch out because scale, complexity, sphere of influence, all of that gets bigger. What I was going to say about, what are we optimizing for? I think there's still a little bit of work, a lot of work to do to kind of really accelerate where we go with the leadership framework. And do you know what? There's a big gap, and whether this language lands right, I'll test it out with you because I haven't done before. But
hit me.
A lot of work I did in my previous role was about line managers, about getting. It sounds, a lot of people go, we're not talking about management because that's the tactical stuff. We want to talk about the visionary, the leadership stuff. But most of us are leaders and managers, and getting the, understanding what good looks like in the manager space. And we don't measure that in our promotion processes really at the moment. And
I didn't want to lay the accusation to ask if you did or not, but I feel like, so here's my toxic male solution orientated approach, which I hate that we do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I would say 60% of your marks for your next promotion will come from 360 feedback. 60% before you've even showed up on the day. 60%. And then maybe 25%, 30%, maybe 20% of that will be a situation. It will be a task-based scenario assessment. And then maybe 10 or 15% will be an interview. But at the minute, I mean, I think I speak to a lot of services, but I'm not going to pretend to stay up to date with what everybody's doing. I think the vast majority will say they have embedded 360 feedback because it probably sits on a system in their leadership and organizational development part of their organization. I bet less than 10% of the organization use it. I bet it's not mandated that they use it. I bet if I sent out 10 requests on your version of 360 feedback, no one has any obligation to get back to them at all. And I appreciate that's perhaps just because it's still in its infancy. But when we think of cultural, developing our cultures and psychological safety and all that jazz, it's a bit like the future's here, but it's not evenly distributed. Because I was working in an organization 18, 19 years ago that had a very similar structure to that, where 360 feedback made up for the majority. Now, people can go, well, that's open to abuse as well, because I get a piece of pinged email, Sonia has gone for a promotion, and or it wouldn't say that. It'd just say, we're requesting feedback for Sonia in her 6 month, because if you only had it as promotion, people would smash the hell out of it. But like if it was routine, like every 12 months or whatever, let's have a look at your last 5 ones, Sonia. Now, if I hate you, I'll just say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do I trust Sonia? 0. She's a thief, she's a liar, she's this, she's that. How much does she listen to me? 0. Yeah. But that'll be a tangent, over the average of the 10 people that you get it from, it will there or thereabouts balance out. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like that should be, because you could come in and smash it in your interview and show that you've achieved the project and you did the thing. If my task was to get you and 3 other people to do the project, I could just scream at you every day. I mean, most of you would probably go sick, but I might still get some output, or I'll just go, you're all rubbish and I'll do it myself. And I'll just burn the midnight oil and blah, 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 because I'm divorced and I don't like going home and I'm just going to get over the line. But the metric will show our team achieved that project, Sonia. And we'll even put ourselves in for an award for it. I know this is my remarkable pessimism coming out now, but I'm just trying to speak on behalf of the wide selection of listeners that we have. Yeah. It's like, we don't use it as in the way that I think we should. I know I've dragged you down a 360 feedback loop here. We'll circle out of it in a second. Where do you think that's a utopian dream? Do you think it should be part of our leadership selection? And if so, to what extent would it be useful? Am I just saying, have I just got recency bias from the past that I remember? I'm sure the system I worked in before was all equally terrible in different ways.
Yeah. So I am a bit of a purist when it comes to this. But I am a huge fan of 360s. So the where I worked before in central government, it was you had to have 360 every year. And I used to cast the net. I was in a senior leadership role wide, even, union reps, you name it, I cast the net. Well, because I just truly believed that the best way of me being at the top of my game was to get the feedback, what do people not like? What am I getting wrong? And to your point about it evening out, I think one time, I can really care about this stuff and I want to please people, and someone rated me as like rubbish at everything. And I thought, oh gosh, but it did even out. And I was like, okay, yeah. I can take some balance from this. Everything's a bit about balance, isn't it? But strictly speaking, my view is 360 is best used for development. So, it should be a regular thing, and it should be done with evidence. So, what is my real bugbear is where people have a 360, but they go through the motions, bit of a tick box. They don't give any examples. Like, what can you do? What can anyone do? Especially if they're lacking in self-awareness. If someone doesn't go, right, Pete, when you did this thing 2 weeks ago, what really didn't feel good.
I agree, but that's don't make good the enemy of perfect, because that might be step 5. But even if the prevailing opinion was just, people say they don't trust you, Pete. I'm like, really? But how? Like, why? And that's, you want some context. Yeah. However, the data is what the data is, Pete. So that's down to you now to go and find out a little bit why people don't trust you. Because whether we have context at this moment in time or not, it still is a fact. And I'm sorry we can't provide you with any better feedback than that at the minute. But even that, I feel, would be an improvement. Because it would at least stop. Because if there's not a massive amount of psychological safety, maybe Sonia's not going to put, how clever can you be with your feedback before you know it was me that wrote it? If we're anonymizing it, which we'd probably have to do to start with. Because it might be very rare that I give you the truth. I mean, I would give you the truth. But like, a lot of people might not. They'd be like, well, I don't want to say that about my line manager. Because if I say that and then they don't get the job because I've said that, well, I'm stuck with them. Yeah. And they know I said that.
Yeah. And there's that fear of repercussions. So,
of course.
I mean, what I would say is, as a psychologist, we always think about, multi-source, multi-method type approach to assessment to getting the right person. And I was going to say, my point about the prison service is the suite of promotion assessments was written and analytical capability, incident management, and people management. And we used to assess that through a number of simulations, role play simulations. I know people hate role plays. A lot of people do, but the point is, what a lot of the evidence shows over and over again is if you can directly observe someone doing a job relevant task thing, and if that sometimes is having a difficult conversation with a colleague or a direct report or a senior, because you've got to be able to manage upwards. You're seeing how people walk the walk and talk the talk in a context.
Why do people hate simulations?
I don't know. I actually quite like them. I did some training on Tuesday, and we had to film ourselves doing the, talking to a reporter and watch it back and then take some tips and improve. And
did you do the media training?
Yeah.
Did you do the block bridge agenda?
Didn't do that one. We had these different the
mechanisms to which to use if you're confronted with them.
Yeah.
But no, I hate it when someone goes, tell me, because I appreciate you're maybe early in your career, so perhaps you haven't got an example, but tell me what you would do. And then I tell you what I'd do. I'd tell them, hey, that's inappropriate. I'd get the policy out. I'd do the thing, and they're just going to power off the 10 steps that are in the policy. And as long as they get them right, well, I mean, they said the thing. Would you have done that? Would you really do it? Show me.
And that's the thing.
Even show me in a simulation.
Yeah. I have a mantra that my teams know, and it's about show, not tell. But that's the same, I think, as currency in a selection context, because you're actually showing. Because some people, and we talked about emotional intelligence and self-awareness, some people think they might do something, but and it actually, when we were rolling these assessments out in the prison service. Gosh, you can imagine at the time, this is 3 years ago, we had so much pushback, so many appeals. It was so litigious. I didn't do that. So what we used to do is video record all the assessments, and that served, like, we could do quality assurance. So, you get a rogue assessor who doesn't know how to assess. You can make sure that, there's consistency and inter-rater reliability. But also, most powerful, we could sit down with the individual and sometimes the line manager, and they'd be like, I don't know, I should have scored full marks, and I definitely said that or did that. And you put the video on and you'd be like, where did, and
what people think they would do is such BS, in my words. Like, do you think you would have taken in Anne Frank? Don't know if I would. Yeah. She comes knocking and the German soldiers are running around outside. Says, hey, can I try next door? And then if they're not in, then maybe come back. Would probably be most people's, and I know I'm being extraordinarily catastrophizing extremism there, but when you to shrink that back to the local level, your mate who was a firefighter and is now a crew manager, shoulder to shoulder with you, says, does, acts in a way that you have to sort of tilt your head to the side and go, in the internal voices, did I just catch you right, brother? Is that what you just said? And you go, I would challenge it. Oh, would you really? Would you really? I think a lot of people would. I think a lot of people wouldn't as well, because they just don't have that level of self-comfort, self-confidence. They play golf with that person on a regular basis. They're my gym buddy. Our kids go to gymnastics together. I think that level of just agency is a lot rarer than we think it is. And we make mistakes of putting people... Do you do many temporary promotions in your organisation? We're so off topic. I promise we'll get back. Quick pause, because I want to tell you about a new partnership we have with First Tactical. First Tactical builds equipment for people who work when environments are seriously unforgiving. And if you go to their website, you'll find kit is designed specifically for us, for firefighters, for police officers, technical rescue teams, fire investigation, hazmat, hazardous materials teams, urban search and rescue. This is honestly the equipment that you really want to rely on. It's built for real operations, real pressure, long ass days, and I genuinely use this stuff. Here's a few of my favorites. They've got their men's Defender short sleeve. I've got that in black. It's got a huge load of specialized pockets, space for all of our gears, the pads, the pens, all of the stuff. It's got them on the sleeves on both sides. Also got the Defender pants. These have got 28 pockets in total on them. It's mad. Let's be honest, we absolutely love the bags. I use their 25-litre specialist half-day backpack. The shoulder straps as well are strong AF. Like I say, this isn't lifestyle gear. Is built for real world, real operations. We talk about the realities of the job, and First Tactical is just the ideal partnership for us. So go take a look, firsttactical.co.uk. Now back to the show.
Yeah, we have gone all over the place.
Sorry.
So there are a number, but what I've been really clear on is that temporary means temporary.
Okay.
Because
what does that mean then? 6, 12 months?
It means a short
months?
period. It shouldn't go beyond, if it goes beyond, I think, 6 months, then you're talking about, well, actually, it's not temporary, is it? It's longer than that. Because, in my previous jobs roles, I get it. There's nothing more frustrating for individuals. And it happened in my previous role. People might have been temporarily promoted for like 2, 3, 4 bonkers amount of years, and then when they go for the actual substantive promotion, they're not successful, and they can't. It's really hard.
The math
to
doesn't math for them.
I've been. Do
you know what I think is worse than people stuck in those situations? Promoting the wrong person, because you will probably know better than most how remarkably difficult it would be to get someone who has since been proven inappropriate and/or incompetent and/or not a good fit for the culture of whatever they're doing, trying to get them out of that job. Whoa. We're talking some serious resource time and some union conversations and some this and some that and whatever else. I'm a big fan of temporary promotions because I've sat there and promised you the world. You're going to be blown away like, Sonia, I'm literally just going to smash the whole district plan. Everyone's going to be developed. Like, culture's going to go through the roof. And like, you're welcome, basically. And they go, it's amazing, Pete. I really look forward to sitting down in 6 months and you telling me about all of this wonderful magic you're going to pull out of your leadership bucket. Yeah. So go for it. I'm supporting you. Here's your temporary. And they go, what temporary? Like, what's this rubbish? Do you know what I mean? And I think 6 months on, but again, it requires a large amount of capacity within the organization to then put a structured development together. Not a large amount. It requires an intentional amount of structured development to put in place for that person and for it to be tracked and measured and have some kind of agreed standardization on it, which makes it very difficult. And often I think why it gets a bad rap.
And I don't think it should, but it's if it's done properly. So, real clarity of expectations, both in terms of the what and the how, good feedback. Because I'll be honest, I've benefited personally from temporary promotions, and I've benefited the most growth that I've ever had is where I've had brilliant managers and who've said, can you deputise? Can you do this? Can you do that? And you know what? Those opportunities have been the things that have helped me progress, and I would want to give those opportunities to people because I think that's what we should do. I think we have a duty of care, a responsibility to help people develop, and where we see some potential that we can hone that and give it some exposure.
Let's try and crowbar and rip this train back onto the tracks of humour. My fault, not yours. When we were talking earlier about appropriate areas of expressing these things, there were some really interesting things in the elements where we could perhaps have some suggested safe spaces to be doing this stuff, building opportunities for people to do it in spaces where it's more appropriate. I think that would be a big cognitive leap for people as well if we said, we're able to start doing it in debriefs, in safe spaces, on stations, almost where you go onto a course and people say, oh, it's Queensberry rules or whatever it is in here. I forget what the rule they usually say, actually, where it's like everything stays inside the room. What's that rule? Sometimes I used to have it on a slide somewhere. Giving people that freedom, because I do it with my daughter. We talk about safe space, and then she can let out her frustrations in all of the language and all of the colour that she chooses to use it with. I'm not massively strict on language with my daughter anyway. Again, I speak very much about context. Like if she says, oh, Daddy, like you were such a dick when you dropped me off this morning, then funny. Yeah, because I was blaring the music and I was saying, hey, baby, love you, have a great day, whatever I was doing. But if she walks down the stairs and says, oh, for F's sake, I'm like, whoa. That's aggression. That's hostile and nasty for everybody else that's in the house with you. What's the matter? Like, it wasn't what you said, it's how you said it. That's what you did there, baby. None of that might seem very condescending to other people, but I feel like that's a nice like analogy for it, if you will.
Yeah, I like that. And I am going to segue back into it, but
please.
We talked earlier about authenticity and bringing your whole self to something. And I think in a work context, it's your whole professional self. Professional can include humour as well. For example, I play cricket. What we might say on in that context might be different to how we would operate, and it's helping people understand. Because I've thought a lot over last many years actually about what does that whole self mean. But coming back to the humour stuff, there's a few points that I really want to land because I don't ever want people to go away from this podcast or read the research and think humour's a survival tool because, well, it's one of a kind of whole plethora of stuff. It can build that camaraderie. It can relieve and put some distance between the horrific, can't it? But if it's used in the wrong way, well, it shouldn't. It should be a pressure valve, not a processing strategy in terms of the humour. It's not. It shouldn't just be seen as, well, it's a coping tool, because I think that would give me a red flag. Like, I'm using that to cope. So I think what you're trying to get to is from an organisational design perspective, from a policies perspective, how can we what can we do? Like, where does the research lead us to next? But certainly, even though I've said it's not a coping mechanism, what I don't want any colleague to suppress what they feel in the moment of trauma, because that's That's
it's coming back up somewhere.
Yeah, it's psychologically and physiologically.
It's exactly what I was told about addiction when I went through Narcotics Anonymous. They're like, you're just going to push a beach ball down and it's going to pop up somewhere else in this swimming pool of life and hurt, splash, somebody else. So we can't tell you that being an addict is wrong, in the same way that we can't tell you, the way you're processing this trauma is wrong, because we want you to process it. And like you say, the problem with organizations is they provide such a rich source of humorous situations, don't they? Events, relationships, jokes, ironic observations, pranks, whatever else it might be. And you almost need to temporarily suspend some of the organizational ways of thinking about our interactions in order to allow humor to exist, which people can just like emotionally disassociate from certain situations. And I know you said, like, you keep referencing that the sort of literature hasn't necessarily pointed at this before, certainly in terms of an emergency services, but I'll keep referencing it back. And I do encourage people to go down here and click on this thing to get it, because there is a wide variety of academic rigor that has been put into the references. I'm just looking at Porter and Lee, there's Kahn, there's Cronenberg, there's lots of tangible threads that you've stitched this blanket together with. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it stands on its own 2 feet as something we could use to aid our cultural pathway, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I guess when I grasped, I should say, this opportunity to dip my toe in the water with Noreen Tarini, who had already she'd already started this piece of research. A lot of that was because new into the sector, I'd viewed the select committee. There was the spotlight on culture and misconduct, and it just prompted me to think, right, what we need to do as, me personally as a senior leader in my service and for the sector is put in place some support and tools, if you like, to support regulation. But that's, if we think about it, it's multi-layered, isn't it? It's individual, team, function, organisational level. And I think you had asked me, are there blind spots or how do we get people to recognise this stuff? But first and foremost, and I did present this research at the ASA conference last year, actually, with Noreen.
I was about to say, how do you get on with your professional colleagues at similar levels? Because you referenced, Phil and John when you were at AFSA, and just the different ways that perhaps we interpret it. Sometimes the etymology of words and what the words mean to each person can be triggering, and or the way that they hear what they think you said. But how did that conversation go? Because I imagine that was one in the public domain, but you'll have had very many similar ones.
And
behind.
I think the AFSA conference that was that in November, where we had a little bit of a panel discussion. It was recorded. So, how does that go? I suppose I'm always, in different contexts, you're more or less confident, but actually my professional values always drive me to, even with a little bit of caution, to kind of, I often, I won't say disagree, offer an alternate perspective, let's say. Yeah. So I think this is the thing about when we had that conversation. I don't think Jonathan will mind me saying, Phil poses the question, is banter ever okay? And I was reading this report, actually. It's referenced in the references, but it was an Institute of Leadership and Management report, and it was banter. Is it just a bit of fun or crossing the line? And on a serious note, and it is serious, there's, in that study, it's a few years ago, but there's still 25% of respondents where banter's problematic, it's negative, and that's never okay. It's never okay to be using banter, like I've talked about, against a personal characteristic or to the detriment of someone, and it's this reciprocal nature. But what my view is actually, as part of everything that we've discussed, there is room for humour and for banter with those conditions. And I think that's where we need to get to in terms of the next steps from this research. actually, as I finished this, as we wrapped this up and wrote it, I was like brimming with ideas of I'm going to do this next, and that's what I'd started talking to Rob about. How do we expand this out? Because there's so.
Well, I'm optimistic this conversation will breathe new life into it, because, like you say, this was not the first, but it was a shot across the bow of do we even have a professional appetite to explore this? I think there's a problem with the fact we use the word banter,
And we purposely did, I'm saying banter because I think, people.
Well, I know you didn't. Language. You use the word humour
a
lot in your study, but when people they do that quick shift, where as you say, oh, you mean banter? No, banter is back from like things like the 1600s, and it was aggressive mocking of ridicule of someone, often drawn from malice or something like that. And that is the problem if you walk out there, me, you, anyone, and say, banter can be appropriate. Well, then we need to be intentional about the words that we're using and what those words mean to other people. And if you do get some literary genius who wants to unpick your etymology of the word, then they'll go, well, actually, banter means this. And then you're like, oh, you know what I meant. But I think humour is more the specific word, obviously, as by design, as that's the word that you build around the conversation and the research that you've done. But yeah, I think that was maybe why John took such a strong position on the word banter, because people it's a very emotive word. It's a political beach ball that people can bounce around and go, oh yeah, banter's bad. Oh, like, behave yourself. Like, humour isn't banter. There's different things here.
Yeah, and actually not just in our sector, there's been this connection with that, let's say, humour and misconduct. And we also need to remind people that there's a connection between humour and well-being as well. And the things that, it's in the paper, but the kind of stuff that I think we need to be thinking about for this, and I spoke to Dr. Rowena Hill about this after the presentation. She's like, this is a really important topic.
She's great.
She's brilliant, yeah.
I love her. We can have her on again. But there's so many people in ASA I want to keep having on. They're amazing.
Yeah, anyway. I was there last week, and was it last week? And a whole, it's brilliant. Lots of other different bits of research. So much. I felt intellectually nourished after that session.
I know.
But what I really think about this stuff, right? So we need to make sure, give guidance. Not too much. People want things written down. I've found it, from me stepping into the sector, they like, a good policy, or, they like it. And I'm like, no, we can't always write everything down, because you need to.
No, but then when they follow that thread to the worst possible end, they go, we need it though. We need something to point at to go, I'm issuing you this final written warning, and I'm going to point at this. Do you know what I mean? So at the worst end of that, it needs to be, but not everything needs to be, like you say. For 80% of the cases, they can be dealt with guidance, can't they? It's often the things that are malice, intentional, usually have actually, if something's that bad, it's probably something legal there as well. If they have been racist, sexist, physically inappropriate, we can probably lean on the legal framework there, to be honest with you. We don't necessarily need to put it in our policy, because they're probably breaking a law as well.
Yeah, and that's never okay. But I can't take for granted that people know, because like we've talked about, this stuff is subjective. So there is a need for some guidance. And so the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about is, let's make a structured space for in debriefing, spaces for recovery. It's not new stuff. It's probably what, structured decompression, normalising the use of humour, right from the trainees, but not the type of humour of like, the stuff that's being reported, maybe from the LFB culture review around fitting in. It's more like, how can humour be positive but appropriate? Like where are the boundaries around this? Your leadership training managers. And
is there too many invisible landmines there though for us to ever make that leap? Ever is a very catastrophizing extreme way for me to frame it. But like, if we talk about what is appropriate humour, I mean, even if we step out into society, the breadth of comedians and what people will say is appropriate and what is inappropriate, I don't know. I think people might feel that we've got bigger fish to fry. Well, the irony, we haven't, because we're not being that much critically, publicly sort of embarrassed by our professional competence in terms of response. What we are catching a lot of flack for is the cultural stuff. So clearly this is where we do need to start optimizing more of our resources towards. If this was actually a business and they said, you know what, we're selling plenty of sofas, we don't really need to be doing more courses on sofas. I mean, we don't sell the best sofas, but they're pretty good. And I would use that example to be operational competence. Yeah. If they go, we are horrific at selling chairs. Do you know what I mean? Like, our chair sales are terrible. That's the thing we get the most flack for. We're hemorrhaging money from it. It's a failing part of the business. You would think that's where you would put your time, resources, and training. I mean, if you're a business, you just cut off that limb, perhaps. We can't do that. We can't say, no, we're not going to do culture in the fire service. We're just going to focus on response. Because we're pretty good at that bit. It's fairly simple. But within response sits people. And people are culture. So it's the driving force behind anything, no matter what you want to choose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's and complex. Do you know what? There's a great analogy around culture that I love around I've heard you in a different conversation saying, what some stuff's complicated, some stuff's complex. But the thing that I love about complicated versus complex is, it's a similar analogy I've heard you use, but if you've got a jet plane and you've got an instruction book, it's going to be hard but complicated, but you would be able to follow the rules and probably take it apart and put it back together. Culture's more like mayonnaise. Once you've mixed it up, you can't deconstruct.
Can't unmix it. Yeah,
yeah, it's hard. This stuff, and that's probably why it's complicated and complex when you think about humour. So I think, as per some of the recommendations in the research, I think there does need to be a clear policy around what's acceptable and also some real guidance around what constitutes inappropriate humour. We've talked about some of those negative types. We've talked about it's never okay to be derogatory. Also help people, like this bit around having difficult conversations. People must feel okay to speak out where something crosses a line. That, we must help people to be able to do that, because that's going to help, kind of moderate humour in the workplace, I suppose. And not in that way that I've talked about, where people might say to me, well, I just don't know what's okay or not, so I just won't say anything. That's the suppression that's expensive that we've talked about. I mean, there's got to be clear rules, and I think they do exist in we're not starting from scratch with this around social media, on-camera awareness and stuff. And also professional standards, guidelines, team building. There's a whole raft of stuff that comes next.
How soon do you think we should be doing that in someone's career?
In terms of doing what bit?
The team cohesion, the interpersonal elements, the maturity. It's a word we mentioned prior to speaking today that I struggle to use without it appearing condescending, because it's often used in a parent-child relationship and can often be correlated to age, which is often, I think, a wrong connection to be making. I don't think maturity does always come with age. And it depends on what type of maturity, professional maturity versus emotional maturity. I think emotional regulation is a massive thing that we don't give enough focus to. And I wouldn't even know where to start with it. I think a lot of these things you can develop through life experiences, which are remarkably difficult to prescribe in personal development. I always say having kids is one of the greatest personal development tools, but you wouldn't put it on a personal development plan because I think it would be unfair expectation of the person. But they really encourage a bit of self-reflection if you have a child.
There's a great tool when you talk about emotional regulation. I think that's a good point. Right, when should it start? A lot of this stuff should start at the beginning and should be continuous, ongoing. Where it's ever evolving.
Yeah,
culture's ever evolving. It's dynamic. So. I don't think this is a seniority thing, albeit,
I feel like historically it used to be. Well, I think let me go right. So I think we did much better team cohesion 30 years ago because training schools were longer. I know I'm speaking into a tremendous bias of grey book, green book here, so just bear with me. I know I do that too much sometimes. I think it's a lot harder. And you perhaps could speak to team development in Green Book roles. Grey Book roles, Our recruitment tended to be much longer. We would sometimes go to an external provider like the college, as it used to have been, and there'd be a 16, 18-week course, and the team cohesion might happen more naturally.
Yeah.
And there'd be a lot more self-calibration in the locker room of people, whether they're polishing shoes or they're eating together or they're helping each other study. They're helping calibrate behaviours. They're trying to be seen as a united team and representation of West Yorkshire or whoever. Now, when certain people have got hold of what's essential for a firefighter to learn, then they will have come at it from a safety competence perspective, which sits in an operational context and largely devoid of any personal, like any optimized for any personal development that would help that person embed itself in the culture of the organization, because we've just shrunk them down to get them through the sausage machine as quickly as possible and just make them safe. Don't walk into traffic or fall off the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure your helmet's on. That's kind of what we're looking for. But then, if we're accepting that, which whether we consciously or unconsciously we have accepted it, when is that development coming? It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefights podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Because I'm sure you'll have regular feedback from people moving into leading firefighter positions, sub-officer, crew manager, watch manager, whatever people want to use as their terminology. And they can openly say like, well, no one's ever taught me how to do this bit. You keep saying I'm a leader. I don't really feel like one. I don't really understand how you've developed me to be a leader. You've shown me how to use Excel or Firewatch or whatever else. So, we say this should happen at all stages. But when I look at things like the military, they seem to be much more intentional. And maybe that's just a privilege of size. Maybe if we did a lot more regionalization, maybe we'd build capacity in the system to do this. But it doesn't appear that we've left fat in the system to do this intentionally. I imagine your team is not big enough to serve the service to the extent that you would perhaps like them to in a utopian view if you could design it from scratch again. You'd probably want more people doing more stuff in your team to support the organization. Probably a fair statement. I don't know.
I don't actually know. I feel like actually I've been very fortunate with in terms of the relative, we were 1,500 FTE workforce. I feel sometimes energy is not directed in the place where I want it to be. And I've been really thoughtful since I've been in this role around, well, what are the immediate priorities from a people angle, development angle? And I'm not quite there. We're rolling out a 360 and it is mapped to the NFCC leadership framework. But a lot of this stuff that you're talking about, when it's done well and it's done naturally and organically, is supported by OD and L&D professionals, but it comes from the line manager. And so I think where we've had a gap, so I can't speak for every service, I can only speak from experience, but I think it's in being actually contracting at the beginning and really supporting and thinking really deliberately and forensically about the development needs in line with the leadership behavioural expectation
framework.
That's kind of what I did in the civil service, at scale. Is it possible for so many different people operating in thousands of different roles and professions? Is it possible to define one coherent, clear, precise set of leadership expectations? And yes, it is. And then you layer on top, I've always talked about raising the floor and the ceiling of capability, but you layer on top. So for everybody at a certain level, there's a certain amount that you need to know about digital and data. Like even more so, like we can talk about digital data till the cows come home, but everybody needs to know. I'm not a good example after today, but everyone needs to know this stuff about the essentials of data, the essentials of digital, essentials of finance, whatever it is. And then that just, builds, I guess, in terms of, sometimes it's seniority, but sometimes it's, you start off developing, then you move through the competent, and then you become, you mastery of different things. And not everyone can be a deep expert in everything, can they? So it's about, breadth, and sometimes knowing the stuff that everyone needs to know, no matter who you are in the organisation. And sometimes it's, feel like I've gone off on a different thing, but I wanted to say something about emotional regulation, because there is a great tool that I love. I started using it years ago when I was in the prison service, and I carried out this capability review. And at the time we were saying, leadership, how do we define leadership in the prison service? And we had this transformational leadership model, which was brilliant. But I did this capability review looking at, what did we need for the future? It was future facing. And this thing came through: resilience, super resilience, super resilience. And I'm not suggesting
anti-fragile, as the book would say.
Well, but
that book.
One tool I started using, and you said about the development. So I've developed a workbook. It was for governing government promotion, and we had stuff in there around emotional intelligence. So at the time, Daniel Goleman was really up and coming. But this tool that I started using was called the Resilience Questionnaire. And the good news is about resilience is you can develop it. It's not fixed. But there's 8 facets, I think. I can't reel them all off now, Pete. But importantly, one of the points in there is emotional regulation. So I think the definition is something like, how do you know to stay calm and composed during stressful, difficult situations or setbacks, and how do you remain and I've thought about that in different contexts, because there's in an incident context, isn't there? But then there's that, well, over time, when there's stuff layering on top, there's 2 types of resilience, I think, in that sense. But that tool's great because you can rate yourself on these different elements. There's support seeking, optimism, but you can go, right, my emotional regulation needs some attention, and then you can think carefully about how you're going to develop that.
I think those things are loosely framed in the way that the NFC see it. There's almost an echo of Goldsman's work into there, because I think there's 4 or 5. I know I'm just looking now in my mind. There was self-awareness, a self-regulation, and I forget if they frame it as motivation or optimism. There's empathy, and then they write one as social skills, but that's quite a wide breadth of relationship building, influencing, communicating effectively. I feel like when they lump that together with social skills, it's quite a large one. But when you would use this then, so would it be as in a questionnaire to then aid sort of like specific development for that tailored individual moving forward with a raft of courses or resources? Or because I've seen people, having references to TED Talks for their development and books, which some people have been like, bloody hell is this? And I've been like, you've got to, I think of it as a little bit, you've got to have faith before you can have evidence with stuff like this.
Yeah.
Because it is all about a bit of self-exploration. What does it mean to you? You know what I mean? We're kind of firing bullets before we can fire cannonballs. We need to hit you with 7 things and then go, right, you looked at those 7 things. Which one did you relate to? Which one made you just a little bit more intellectually curious about something that you'd done recently, a way that you'd handled a conversation in your team, or even personally? Maybe you coach something, maybe you play hockey, whatever it is that you do personally. Where do you see yourself in those self-regulation aspects? As one example, like there's a great resource I used to use. It was like a calmness app where you would listen to, I forget what it's blooming well called, but the guy that narrated it was fantastic. And he would speak about self-regulation in a really interesting way, where it was a bit like cars coming down a motorway. I forget what it's called. Was it mindfulness app? It was something
the mindfulness app, yeah.
I think it might be the mindfulness app. And he would say, like, you're sitting on the side of a road and you can see your emotions driving down the road towards you. I mean, you can see this. Imagine if I keep interrupting you, which I have done throughout this conversation because I'm terrible at it. First time I do it, you feel a small flash in the back of your mind, which is anger. Yeah. Saying, he's done it again. He's literally just done it again. And you can see it starting to emerge more and more as it comes down the road. Now, you can choose to do one or two things. You can jump out into the middle of the road and go, come on then. And you're going to do battle with your emotion. And you're in the thralls of it. You've jumped into that swell of an ocean. And you are just thrashing around in the rapids. You're a victim to your own emotions. You're a leaf in the wind of everyone else's, interactions with you. You've let go of control. Or you can see it coming and go, that is fascinating. Why is it annoying me so much that Pete is doing this? Why is it annoying? Because he clearly, I'm not sure if he's doing it maliciously. It doesn't seem to be, because he's doing it quite regularly. Maybe it's just the way he communicates. Maybe he's just not very good at regulating his own thoughts and he seems to vomit them out in 27 different versions of the same thing. And then you could just watch it pass you by. Do you know what I mean? Because I've felt it when my children will do something and it's going from that 0 to 100 straight away. And I can just let it fly off the top of this spectrum and just like self-vent. Do you know what I mean? And I don't actually have to let it manifest through me. Because after a remarkably short period of time, you'll see it level out. And then you can perhaps, it's the whole like chimp paradox thing. You can kind of let it rattle the cage and go, I'm going to deal with it. I'm dealing with it. Just you just shake the cage for a bit. And then when you finish shaking the cage, I'm going to deal with it. That's probably, I've fumbled my way through a terrible analogy of self-regulation there, but it's very personal to everybody, isn't it? I think people in HR are probably tremendously disciplined at it because the ease at which sometimes remarkably surprising situations that you will be given evidence about or maybe reported to you, you have to let them to an extent, not wash over you because you don't care, but you have to be able to let them settle and go, wow, what a surprising thing to hear has happened. I never would have anticipated that situation involving those two people would have presented itself on my desk. Very interesting. And not get straight onto the policy or, right, where's my stick? Give me the big one in the corner. I'm going to wield it now. Do you know what I mean? That's not always necessary first point of action, is it?
Yeah. No, hopefully you'll get a carrot instead. I don't really know where to go with that aspect of the conversation.
I think I was talking about self-regulation, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think you were. But this is the point, right? It comes as part of a continued personal, professional development. And the resilience questionnaire is best, in my view, combined with other stuff like a 360, like, conversations with your line manager, triangulate evidence. The tool itself is there to help you get a kind of an insight into where your resilience is, what you can develop. But there are other tools. There's other psychometrics that I love, like, I don't know, Hogan's Development Survey, which there's, you've talked about blind spots, Johari window, but there's certain stuff that can be derailing in our careers if we're not aware of it and we can't like take steps. And some of that stuff might be about emotional regulation. From that aspect, emotional regulation can be harmful to ourselves internally, as we know. So from a wellbeing angle, it's important. But from, in terms of responding to others, if you get out of the car and shout and scream at someone, it's probably going to, not go that
really
well.
Badly.
And that's the point about leadership and management. That can be a derailer. Sometimes we're aware of the impact that we're having, and sometimes people, need some development and support to help hold a mirror up. So,
what if they don't want it?
If they don't want to,
how do you stimulate personal curiosity in someone that thought they were just going for a pay rise and I really desperately just want to do the course that's available to me at that position? I want to do my level 2 so I can do my special course that I've really been interested in doing. I'm not interested in understanding why I use these words or why I react in that way, because I've never even had a grievance against me, Sonia. So I think I'm pretty good at what I do, to be honest with you. No one's ever complained.
Yeah, I think you have to take a different tact. It's kind of like trying to when you have those, like, you think, oh, the penny's dropped, but you've got to help people sometimes some people won't ever, it won't ever connect. And so let's be honest. And I think sometimes that's about having an honest conversation around what are your drivers, what are your dreams, hopes, motivations. Actually, what's your motivation? Is it that you want a pay rise, or is it, that you want to, bit like what you're doing with the podcast, you want to, be a trailblazer, you want to...
This is never going to get me a promotion, though.
But
might actually go the opposite direction.
No, it's about being honest about what, and sometimes it's okay, isn't it? It's okay if people, people want more, motivated by the financial reward. But then it's about being honest and real, and around actually what we need and what we want now is a rounded, holistic leader and manager who's going to think, be able to, the bit about podcasts and TED Talks. Well, if you've only got a narrow, you're not widening your horizons and thinking about the big picture stuff. We used to talk about political astuteness a lot in different roles, but if you're not doing that reading and stuff, then you're going to be so narrow in terms of your what you bring to a role, and it's not just about we're not all going to have all the answers, are we? But that's why having diverse, multidisciplinary teams is really essential. But it's, I guess, trying to find that way in to having a conversation. I think if you're a skilled manager, line manager, or you recommend coaching and or mentoring, it's about opening and trying to nudge from a behavioural science bit, nudge that curiosity and start with something that is going to they can grab onto with individuals. But it's not going to be for everyone, and that's the other thing.
I think it's very much an art form.
Yeah,
this is the true difficulty, and we have to try not to be romantic and over-complexify these elements. But the problem with this is it is a very personal thing. It is a bit of an art form for you personally to find out what your own thing is, because it is very much like art. You'll say something is beautiful. I'll say someone's just thrown a bucket of paint at a canvas. But it's what it means personally to you. And as we continue to bring more divergence into our organization, which will help us solve some of the perennial problems that we've struggled with for the last 40 years, we need different ideas, different perspectives, different upbringings, different worldviews. But in order to do that, we need to have leaders with real chameleon approaches to their teams. Treat everybody fairly, but certainly don't treat them all the same, please. Because that is not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a one-size-fits-all.
Playing an orchestra, that's what you're doing in a team.
Yeah, exactly that. Having a one-size-fits-all approach, we're pretty boring, but also you're not going to get the best out of people. So that's where the situational leadership approach comes in. But you have to, I always say to people, you have to know your people. You have to be able to talk. You have to be able to build the rapport. You have to know what's making them tick. Because if you do, and you have to know to some extent, what they got going on. Because you can, if you don't know that stuff, and it goes back to your point about 360, right? Would you want someone rating you on a 360 if they don't have got a clue? They've never seen you in a situation. They've never seen you in a scenario. So they're going to come at from a subjective viewpoint with very little evidence, or they've not observed you doing this thing. So that's the thing. It's hard, but
what's the long-term goal with the 360? I just want to bring it back down locally for a minute, because I'm conscious we've been speaking for an hour and a half and I've dragged you down rabbit holes that we never even had in mind prior to our conversation. But that's the naturalistic element of a conversation, not an interview. Talk to me about the long-term goal locally with 360, and if you can give any, sort of aspirational view to how we'd maybe like to use this in the sector more widely to help us as one of the many tools we might need.
Yeah. So my goal locally is, and there's been historically I inherited a 360 that wasn't mapped or using the same language as the NFCC leadership framework. So I'm hoping the tool that we're going to use is mapped.
Haven't they just changed it slightly?
We're just reviewing it, yeah. But there are
Lovely.
360 tools. Well, actually, that's good practice. Over time, you should...
It's a live document. It needs to evolve. True.
Exactly. And,
but some services are only just wrapping their head around it and making a plan off the echoes of the last vote. Although it's not chalk and cheese. It's not changed that much. It's more of a pivot than a hard left.
I'd say it's an evolution, and I think if I look at leadership behaviours over time in different sectors, different, a whole load of different professions, behaviours are behaviours, really, if we do the mapping. But what does change is the context. So, in terms of the pace of technological advancement and so on. So you might want to update, artificial intelligence, so on. But I want 360 to be rolled out to be normal. People invest in actually giving good quality feedback to understand its true value. Like, it's not just a tick box, but it is a critical part, element, source of evidence in terms of supporting development. Because sometimes people just don't know what they don't know unless you help them hold a mirror up to themselves. And like I say, I think some of my 360s sometimes it's hard to read, but it spurs you on and you think, actually, I can do something about this. So the plan is to start to roll that out, to embed it, to make it, it's not just it happens at a one-off point and then you just leave it in an email.
And will it be a contributing feeder towards how our future leaders are selected? Will it have some sway on that?
Well, like I say, my view is 360s are best placed for development, but that should be wrapped in a conversation. When you think about ready for progression, I think there are different components like capability, aspiration, motivation, indicators of potential. So that's what I'm thinking about for West Yorkshire. Hopefully in my role as Deputy Lead Officer for People for the NFCC, then I can start to, open up. But I must say that there is really good work across the sector. And like I said...
Do you work together much? Like, I know the chiefs get together every couple of weeks on NFCC calls. The leads of people, partners, people services, HR, I'm sure you probably all have different names these days. Do you lot get a chance to communicate and calibrate much? I don't know.
Yeah, we do, actually. I think there's still opportunities for acceleration. When we talk about, because I was really struck when I joined around, why don't we have one approach to doing this stuff? My experience when I was in the civil service was
Sonia,
stuff across, like,
silly.
Heard you talking to Anne about procurement. I'm like, well, yeah, economies of scale. And actually, if we're talking...
Oh, God, that is just like, you would never run your own business like that. It's astonishing. John said it as well. There are some local variations. I mean, the leadership thing should be even more aligned, I thought. There's more probably local variations in terms of procurement than there ever would be in leadership development. Surely that one we can pretty much give a very, very, very similar approach to nationally, I'd like to think.
Definitely. And to be fair, that was the first conversation I had with John when I joined West Yorkshire. Was like, where we can do things once and do them well for the sector, where we can use the NFCC tools and products, where we can lean in and where we can take a sector-wide approach. So that's what I'm about, really, where, we used to have this saying, steal with pride, but that's the thing.
Yes.
Let's share good practice.
It's the biggest compliment.
Yeah.
It's the biggest compliment, But we were taught from school that copying's cheating. No, it's not. It's a great compliment.
Yeah, you don't need to reinvent it. If the evidence base is there, if something, from you using tools perspective to make selection decisions, we want them to be reliable and valid. So yeah, if we've got that evidence there and we can let's go with it, and you don't need to reinvent it if it isn't broken, but you can continually look to improve stuff. So I hope that's answered the question with the 360s.
It has.
There's a lot to do. One thing though, I think you asked me about blind spots.
Yeah. Back to your Harry's window.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's a blind spot, but certainly something that I really think we should accelerate together is celebrating what we do really well. Because honestly, the people that I work with meet, and we do meet a lot. We have a strategic lead people forum. You asked me, do we meet regularly? Yes, we have a people board, which I had this week. So we have a lot of touch points. I meet with my regional peers.
Nice.
But what when I came, we just had a culture survey, and one of the values people said they wanted to see around here was employee recognition. So, long story short, we've launched a awards and recognition policy and an event, and but a lot of colleagues said to me, "Yeah, but we shouldn't do that because that's just our job, isn't it? And we shouldn't be getting awarded or recognised for doing our job." And I'm like, "But you're doing really amazing, dangerous stuff, and let's support each other and let's shout about that good stuff." So I don't know how you feel.
It's hard to recognize everyone in similar metrics. Yeah. So I've experienced something similar regionally, locally, where they've gone in and out of favor in these awards programs and or events. I think it might be harder to celebrate this in the non-operational staff, maybe.
Mm.
I think that is where people sometimes will feel the rub, because you've got to be careful not creating even more of an us and them. Because if you do something really operationally effective at an incident ground, you could still say, yeah, but that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. Like you've actually done training courses. I even gave you the equipment to do it. So that is your actual job. But some of it is just like they've done it remarkably well. If someone says, I'm going to complete a project in 12 months' time, and then in 12 months' time I've completed the project, and you're a project manager, surely that is what you're expected to do. However, it will still have been a great achievement, but I think that's equally on both sides of the coin, where people will struggle with how do we recognize brilliance, and actually how do we recognize just competence and what that person is supposed to be doing? Because I think we should do it. My version of doing it is this. I bring on people that I find really interesting and go, oh my God, look at my really interesting friend, how interesting they are. And people go, yeah, I thought that person was pretty interesting. So I think that's maybe a way that I recognize it. We don't come on here and slag things off. I come on here and try and celebrate some of the great work that's been doing, like the report that you put together with your colleagues. But doing it on an awards evening can be very difficult. I'm yet to see it, done really, really well in a way that pleases everybody, but you'll never please everybody. So I think net positive is we should be finding more ways to recognize. And you say that was something that was recognized in your organization. But yeah, don't make good the enemy of perfect. You're going to do one version of it and 60% of people will like it. 40% will be pessimistic and say that people just gave the awards to their friends and the nominations were manipulated and blah, blah, blah. Okay, jump in, tell us how we can maybe pivot it, do it a bit better next time. But I think we should certainly be doing more of it. Yeah. And I love that you guys are doing that. I'm sure Dave is a massive fan of it because when I met with him, he loves, I don't think he was actually really uncomfortable about coming on the podcast because he's not one that talks about himself much. You said when you first had conversation, you were like, so much stuff about Dave there, I didn't even know. And God knows how long I've worked with him because he's not the type to bang his own drum. But my God, will he love to bang the drum of others? He'll tell you about how great everybody else is.
Definitely. Well, I'll invite you as a guest. It's a thing. You've got to get it right. You've got to get the right criteria. And it might not feel fair to everyone, but it might give people, and it shouldn't replace, daily acknowledgement and just the thanks. I noticed that you did a good job there. Yeah. So yeah, but I think it is a net positive overall.
I think it is. I want to be respectful of our time. You've been very generous with your time today. I'm going to encourage people to go, if you look below this, everybody, you'll see a little link. It's a free download, The Use and Abuse of Dark Humour in Emergency Services. Got to acknowledge Noreen and Darren O'Callaghan, Noreen Tarani.
Yes, that's right.
Beautiful. Really interesting research article. It's only about 16 pages. I think it would be very beneficial for you to throw that on your organization's table and use it as a discussion point. There's many great points you could pull out from there, but thanks so much for giving so much of your time today, Sonia. I really do appreciate it. And I really hope we can do some more in the future. Yeah, thanks for a brilliant conversation. Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.